go. I don't have to yell anymore. Okay, so a preacher came and said, listen, you need to be saved. And so what you heard was this: I don't want to go to hell when I die. Right? Maybe, maybe not. This might not be your story. But for many of us in the room, I don't want to go to hell when I die. Which probably that's a commendable idea. Good enough, okay? And so you said, I don't want to go to hell when I die. He's offering a ticket to heaven, which is great. And so he says that salvation is by faith, because that's what Paul said, Disco Paul said. That's what Paul said in the Bible. I'm not going to dance. That's what Paul said, okay? And I don't have roller skates. All right, so Paul says it's by grace through faith. Is this faith and grace thing, not by works, that you're saved. And so they said, if you put your faith in Jesus, you don't need to work your way up to heaven. You don't need to work your way up to salvation. It's grace through faith, which is 100%, I believe, scriptural and true. So you put your faith in Jesus, and they said, here's a ticket to heaven when you die. And so you would say, I'm saved. I mean, they might not have said the word ticket, but you know what I mean. You know, so you're like, I'm saved, I'm good, and if you're from the South, there's at least a decent chance that's happened in your life. Maybe you were at a high-pressure revival, you know what I mean? Those high-pressure revivals. Or maybe it was a very genuine moment between you and God. But at some point along the way, you said, Jesus, save me. I put my faith in you. And you might not have used these words, but your word promises, if I put my faith in you, that you'll save me, and I'll go to heaven when I die, and that's great, okay? So for all of you that would say, I'm saved, here's the thought. The problem is that many of us are saved and sad. Like there's no joy in our salvation. Now, hit the pause again. You're not supposed to be happy all the time. And when I say sad, there are times to mourn and there are times to grieve. Jesus wept, okay? And Jesus is the ultimate example of what humanity's meant to be. But the joy of your salvation has been lost. And I'm going to throw out there today that possibly it's because after you were saved, you stopped. And you haven't gone any further into the life that God's calling you to. Now, some context for this. Don't forget, Paul is the guy that says it is by grace through faith which you are saved. That means if you believe, like whatever belief you can summon up, and you believe and you put your trust in Jesus, that's enough. Don't lose that concept. But a lot of the book of Romans is a guy named Paul that came from a culture that was very centered on good works. You know, like feeding the poor, giving generously to worthwhile causes, loving. They should have loved people that were hard to love. They weren't as good at that one. All the things that Christians are supposed to do, like good works. And so the book of Romans, a lot of it is Paul going in this wrestling match between good works and faith. And if you ask Paul, which one is it, Paul? Is it faith or good works? Paul would say, I'm not going to give you a yes or no. I'm going to write a whole book you got to look at, okay? But if he had to give a yes or no, I believe that Paul would have said it's faith. But maybe the question is the wrong question. And is that close to being the right question? Because we ask, as Christians, is it faith or works? And maybe the question should be, is it faith and works? Not to get us into heaven when we die. Not to make us right with God. But is your Christian life, if you had to choose, is it just faith or is it just me living out the Christian life, the Jesus example? Paul would say the answer is yes. Yes. It's faith that makes you right with God, but don't stop there. Now, I'm going to give away the punchline to the message here, okay? And then we'll read through the book of Romans and we'll get there. In other places, Paul describes the life that you live if you're a follower of Jesus after you are saved. How about this? I'm going to use a different word for saved the rest of the morning. Let's use the word justified. I know that's not what we normally do, but that just takes us out of, there's a lot of baggage that comes with the word saved. So justified. Justified means that when God looks at you and judges you now, but one day in the future, He rules in your favor, and it's like you're not guilty in the eyes of God. And so, yes, you get to go be with Jesus when you die. And yes, you get to look forward to resurrection. Why? Because you're justified. Why are you justified? It's because it's a free gift called grace that you step into through something called faith. I know it's too much theology, but we're going to get there, okay? So, many of you are saved but sad because you got saved and then you stopped. Everybody follow that idea? And you settled into the fact that I'm going to heaven when I die, so I'm going to sit on my hands until it happens. And you have not exercised your faith. Paul uses an example for your Christian life after you are saved like this. He says it's like you're running a race. It's not that you're running a race to get saved. It's not that you're running a race to get to heaven. You are not running a race to get justified. That is all a free gift from God. That all He calls you to do is believe. Are we clear on that? I don't want to confuse anybody. Okay, but he says after that, it's like you're in a race. Like running, right? And the reason I believe that we're saved and our lives are sad when there should be joy is because the fun is in the run. And we're missing out on the life that God's called us to live after our salvation. So, I have no idea what time it is because our TV went out down here. So I'm going to try to finish this thing at 11:15. Y'all at the back, I don't have a clock now, so just wave at me if I get close. We're going to go into the book of Romans, and we're going to pick up that wrestling match that Paul's having. And the wrestling match is between faith and good works. To where if you really pressed him, he would say it's faith. But he would say, even though it is faith, don't forget the good works that God's called you to. So here's where we're going to start. It's in Romans chapter 3, the last verse, in verse 31. He says, then, Paul says with all this in mind, do we nullify the law by faith? We don't have time to dig into the roots of this, the Jewish roots, but the concept is, do you have faith? And because you have faith, not run this Christian life and you just sit on your hands. You're like, I'm going to heaven when I die, so it doesn't matter what I do. Paul says, no. That is, you are taking one part of the answer and you're missing out on all that could be. Do we then nullify the law by this faith? Not at all, he says. Rather, we uphold the law. In other words, the Jesus people who are justified, saved, justified because we put our faith in Jesus, now are called to actually show the whole world what humans are meant to be, which was the point of the law, which is an Old Testament thing. He goes on, and he's talking about Abraham. So Abraham was the sort of the beginner of the Jewish faith. He was the father of all that. And he says in chapter 4, verse 16, therefore, talking about Abraham, keeping Abraham in mind, the promise that God gave Abraham. And here was the promise. I've got 11 minutes. We better hurry. Okay, here's the promise. God said to Abraham, you're an old man already and you've done nothing with your life. It's time for you to move out of your daddy's backyard. And you haven't earned it, but I am going, this is God, I am going to bless the whole world through you, Abraham. That's grace. It's a gift he didn't deserve. Okay? And so the promise is that the whole world's going to be blessed through the Abraham family. And Jesus was a descendant of Abraham, okay? And we are descendants of Jesus people. And let's read on. We're even a descendant of Abraham. He says, therefore the promise came by faith. Remember faith. Faith is what kickstarts this thing. So that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring. And we're thinking like the Jewish people when we read that to start with. But he says, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham. He is the father of us all. And he says it's because faith Abraham was saved. So everyone who puts faith in the Creator that we see clearly through Jesus, now you become children of the promise. And so now you're included in this promise. And the promise is not just to go to heaven when you die. It's to be renewed human beings that show the whole world what creation was meant to look like. And give glory and honor to our Creator as we run our race. Because the fun is in the run. He says, and so this is what we're meant to do. He says, we're all children of the promise, as it is written. I have made you a father, speaking of Abraham, of many nations, He is our Father in the sight of God, in whom he believed, the God who gives life to the dead and calls into being the things that were not. So just to clarify, you don't have to do enough good works to be made right with God. You cannot do enough good works to be made right with God. In fact, the definition of faith is that you run into something that you cannot do. And you ask God to do it, even though it looks impossible, and believe that he will do it. And Paul tells the Abraham story that Abraham's too old to have children, and God says to him, you are going to have children. That's impossible. And Abraham believed the impossible. That's faith. He believed that God would do the impossible. And he says that now we're all children of Abraham, and God brings life out of dead things. Followers of Jesus, that's our story. That there's something inside of us that was dead that God brought to life when we put our faith in Jesus. So Paul's all about, he's like the biggest cheerleader on the faith team. If you imagine, like there's this made up battle between faith and good works. So he's like, yeah, like faith is it. Like this belief that God can do what you can't do when you come to the end of yourself and say, I can't fix me. God, I believe you can. That's the kind of faith that saves human beings, that justifies us, so that when we stand before the Creator, he will declare us not guilty. But Paul would say, when you get saved, don't stop. You weren't saved to sit down. You were saved to run. All right, let's keep going. We're skipping a little bit here to get to the end, but in chapter 5, the very beginning of chapter 5, he says this. He says, therefore, he tells this whole Abraham story. And the Abraham story is this, is that if you have let's pretend you had a Jewish heritage, which is something to be unbelievably proud of. We said last week, because they're the ones that kept these stories alive. They're the ones that kept this family going, this Abraham project going. He said you have something to be proud of. But now, everyone who puts their faith in Jesus is part of this promise. We inherit this promise. Because we're all children of Abraham, he says, because it was faith. And so we're the faith people. We're the faith descendants of Abraham instead of the biological descendants. And so he says this, therefore, since we have been justified, which is the same, that's how we use saved in America. We use the word saved. Are you saved? I was saved. I got saved. We could put the word justified in there. Therefore, since you have been justified through faith, not through works, through faith, not through being good, through faith, not through knocking off your addiction, through faith, not through getting a better job, not through getting married, not through getting baptized, not through coming to church, through faith. We have been justified through faith, Paul says. We have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now sit. No. Stand. And Paul makes the argument that faith is what kickstarts this thing. But now there is a life that follows, and the fun is in the run. Okay? And it's in running out this Christian life that we're called to do. Of living this life that's got this new ethic that says that we love every single image bearer. Not because they're good or because they're bad or because they're our skin color or a different skin color. But we love every image bearer like Jesus loved us because we've been justified. And now we're this new creation in Jesus. Okay, I got maybe an analogy that might help. Okay, a triathlon. Has anybody in here ever ran a triathlon? Done a triathlon. You don't run a whole one. Anybody? Okay, we got one. Okay, so in a triathlon, I was hoping nobody would raise their hands in case I get the details wrong. In a triathlon, the first thing is you swim a half mile, I think, okay? I can't see real good, so if you're shaking your head, no, I'm just going with it. Okay, you swim a half mile, okay, which is why I've never done one, okay? That's a long way. For those of you that don't know, a half mile that's a big lake, okay? You got to swim across a very big lake. So you swim a half mile. After you get through swimming, I might get these backwards, you bike like 12 miles, and then you run a 5K, which is 3.2 miles, okay? And so I can never do it because I can never swim a half mile. I couldn't do it. But just imagine I can't swim at all, but my dream in life, I would find my fulfillment in life if I could do a triathlon. So Austin, who says he's done a triathlon, says, Jimmy, I'm a super swimmer, okay? And it's going to be hard, but I will drag you across the lake, lifeguard style, for half a mile, okay? If you just hop on, I will take, you can't swim, and if I didn't do this, you would drown or you wouldn't do the triathlon, but you hop on and I will take you across the lake and then you can go run, okay? You can run, you can do the rest of the triathlon. And so Austin does that. It about kills Austin because it would kill anybody to do that. We get to the other side after he's given everything. He has blown his chance to win the triathlon. He's probably about drowned himself. We get to the other side. I crawl off his back and he says, go have at it. And I'm like, I just think I'll sit here. I'm good. I just think I'll sit here. I'm good. And I've been telling him the whole time, I'm like, listen, I've had a dream my whole life, Austin. Okay, I've been building them up. I got a dream my whole life that I would run a triathlon ever since I was a little boy. And I saw a triathlon on TV. I said, if I can run a triathlon, I wrote it down in my journal when I was 8 years old, Austin. Look at these. These are tear stains from 30 years ago. Like, you know, and I said, if I could run it, it would give me meaning and purpose and all this stuff. And he does all this and he sacrifices to get me across, to do something I can't do. And then I don't run. Okay, that is a picture of what it looks like for someone to be saved and then to sit down. Is that someone did for us what we couldn't, and it's not perfect, okay? This is not a perfect analogy because none are. Someone did for us what we could not do. I could not have said, I will swim my way to a triathlon because I would have drowned. Just like you cannot say, I will good works my way to justification. It's only through Austin. It's only through faith for us. It is only through faith. It's a free gift of God. But wouldn't it be crazy for Jesus to die on the cross to get you to the other side of the justification story just so that we sit down? Because the fun is in the run that God's called us to live out. And so I want to challenge us, church, in the South. I just know it is very tempting to settle into our salvation and to think, I'm going to heaven when I die, and that's good enough. Well, yes, but no, it's not good enough. You follower of Jesus, you new creation man, you new creation woman, you new creation teenager. No, God is so sad looking down on our life, seeing image bearers like you and me who could have the adventure of a lifetime if we would run the run that He's called us to. If we would run the race that God's called us to. And the good race is comprised of things in the Bible you hear called good works. Good works don't justify you, but oh my goodness, wouldn't it be a shame to be justified and then sit on the beach and not to live out a life of good works that reflect the goodness of Jesus to the whole world? And when you read the book of Romans, as we get ready to close it out next week for this series, it is a wrestling match between these two things because the idea is both are so important. Faith is so important. Faith comes first. You cannot run before you swim in the triathlon. And it's what faith that makes you justified. It's pure, simple belief. It's an addict who believes just the same as it is a millionaire who everybody thinks has it all together. It's the same belief. No good works, no upright reputation. It is faith. But then we are called to live out that faith. And I just want to challenge us as a church. My time's up because we've got to do this present. We don't got to. We get to do this presentation. I'm excited. I want to challenge us. I don't care how big we grow, if we're a church body, that we get lazy in our salvation, then we'll never make the impact God's called us to in our community. But if we'll be the kind of church that clearly communicates it is by grace through faith we have been justified, period. And then we get the privilege of running. and of exercising our faith. And I'll quit with this, okay? Paul says, the same Paul that wrote Romans says in his first letter to the Corinthians, also known as 1 Corinthians, creatively titled, okay, he said in his first letter to the Corinthians, work out your faith. And the concept is this, is that this faith has justified you and it's in you. But how dare you keep it just in you? It's time that you take the faith that has rescued you and justified you, the transformation that God has done in you, and get it out of you, image bearer. And what's the word that it's going to take to do that? This isn't Jimmy, this is Paul. He said it's work. And so I just want to challenge us as a church. While if all we do is get lazy in our salvation, if we become the kind of church that proclaims the good news of Jesus that says it is by grace through faith you have been justified, and we become the kind of church that says now when you begin that race, it's not over. The fun part's beginning. The adventure's beginning. And we call people out and we encourage people and we dare people and we cajole people and we beg people and we say, please, 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 will you step into the adventure of living out and working out your faith in the works that God's called you to do and giving your life generously to things that are worth it because you are worth nothing less than that image bearer. And how dare we justify people do anything less with our lives. Okay, I'm going to pray, and we'll close out. And this is sort of a weird way to close. But I just want to pray, and then we'll transition into this next thing we want to show you. But I want to challenge you, church. If you've been sitting on your salvation, I guess it's time to get to work. Not so that you can go to heaven when you die. It's time to work out your salvation. It is time to get to work. Don't sell yourself short. Your life's meant to be an adventure. And the fun is in the run, sad, saved person. The fun's in the run, in running the race that God's called us to live. And running the race looks like forgiveness and generosity and serving and giving and all the things that Christians are known for around the world when we're at our best. That's what we're all called to do. And it reflects the goodness of God. Father, I pray that you would help us to work.